welcome back to the Cyclonic Thrift Channel, your home for competitive magic on a budget. As always, please hit that like button and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get thrifty. The commander we'll be looking at today is Beluna Grandsquall. She's a new commander from the Wilds of Eldraine set that just came out, and I wanted to build her because, well, one, she has Adventure, which is a card mechanic that has seen a lot of love in this recent set, but previously hasn't really been a big part of Magic, and hasn't really had a way to create an adventure spell typal deck. So Beluna is a super unique commander, but also having her have adventure in the command zone is also interesting. So we'll get into that in a second, but Beluna is a green, blue, red legendary creature, giant noble. She's a 4/4, but she has Seek Thrills, which is an adventure instant. It's 2 green, blue, red, and mill 7 cards, then put all cards that have an adventure from among the milled cards into your hand. So that's the instant adventure side of it. But herself, she has Trample, and then permanent spells you cast that have an adventure cost 1 less to cast. That have an adventure cost 1 less to cast. So essentially, when Beluna's in the command zone, you can cast her for either her instant adventure side or for the permanent side. When you cast her for the instant, she then goes into exile, that you can then cast her for her permanent cost later. Or if you choose, you could put her back into the command zone, so you could repeatedly cast her adventure side. However, an interesting aspect with this is the idea of commander tax on an adventure commander. So essentially, in either form, whether you're casting Beluna for her instant side or her permanent side, commander tax will apply to either one. So say you cast her first for her permanent side, just green, blue, red. She comes on the battlefield, and then someone kills her. She goes back to the command zone. And the second time you want to cast her instant side, the adventure. Now it's that additional 2 is going to apply to that cost. So instead of 2 green, blue, red, it's going to be 4 green, blue, red, essentially. Now, an interesting aspect of it is when you cast her for her adventure side and put her into exile, you're not putting her into the command zone. So when you cast her from exile, her permanent side from exile, commander tax is not going to have an effect. And this is true no matter how long the game goes, how many times you've cast her from the command zone. If you cast the Seek Thrill side and then cast Beluna from exile, when she's on an adventure, she'll still always cost the green, blue, red. So that may be the most effective way of kind of reducing the effect, because it is kind of sucky that, you cast her for an instant, but then her permanent side ends up getting more expensive when she goes back to the command zone. But regardless of that, the adventure typal strategy is super interesting. There's a lot of super fun cards that we're going to go through. And yeah, on a budget, there's certainly limitations for the power level of this deck, but I think it'll be super fun and super flavorful for a Wilds of Eldraine commander. So to start off, pretty self-explanatory, we're going to be running a lot of adventure spells, or a lot of creatures that have an adventure spell attached to them. So the first one is Elusive Otter for a blue. It's a creature otter, and it has prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and creatures with power less than Elusive Otter's power can't block it. And it also has the sorcery, the adventure sorcery of Grove's Bounty. X and a green, and you distribute X +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. So this is a super low to the ground spell. Get it out turn 1 if you want, but also maybe later in the game when you have access to more mana, you can use it to kind of pump your whole team. Get those +1/+1 counters distributed. The second one is a Tempest Heart. It's a 3 and a green for a creature elemental elk. 3/4 has trample, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, you put a +1/+1 counter on Tempest Heart. So with adventure spells, you know, there aren't a ton in this deck that are going to be 5 or greater. Now, the Seek Thrills, you know, on Beluna certainly is, and there will be a lot of either instants and sorceries with adventure or permanents that you could cast for 5 or greater. So there's definitely some value to be had here, and you're going to be pumping up Tempest Heart, and the fact it already has trample on it is going to be huge. Now it also has the adventure instant Scan the Clouds. It's 1 and a blue. You draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. So this is just a great way to kind of filter your hand early on if you want, or later in the game when you're really looking for a certain piece. Either way, this is going to be a helpful way to kind of dig through the deck. And the last one I want to mention here specifically is Tlinkali Hunter. It's 5 and 2 green for a creature Scorpion Scout. It has trample as well, and once each turn you can pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a creature spell you cast from exile. And it's a 7/7. So on top of it being just a massive beater, 7/7 trample, it's going to reduce all of the, you know, well, not all of them, but the most expensive creature spell you cast as they're on an adventure. So we, you know, if you look in the deck tech, we have quite a few creatures that are in the 4, 5, 6 range, and getting that 6 mana reduction on one of those spells is huge value. It also has the adventure sorcery Retrieve Prey for 1 and a green, and you exile target creature card from your graveyard until the end of your next turn. You can cast that card. So again, kind of a semi-graveyard recursion aspect to it. It does kind of force you to play that card quickly, either on the turn you cast this or the next one. But again, we have a lot of payoffs for casting from exile, so the fact that this card puts it into exile for you to cast is super helpful. And now we can get into some of those payoffs that we have. So when we're casting from exile, playing from exile, whenever we cast one of those adventure instants and sorceries, you're going to be putting that card into exile. So when you cast the permanent side, all of these cards are going to give you some value here. So the first one is the Lost and the Damned. It's 1, a blue and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control from anywhere other than your hand, or you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, aka exile, create a 3/3 red spawn creature token. So this is just going to be a super helpful token generator, create some blockers, you know, potentially some damage can be getting in when you attack, but I mean, anything, a 3/3 is nothing to sneeze at, and whenever you just get that incidentally because you're doing your strategy, that's going to be super helpful. The next one is Wild Magic Sorcerer. It's 3 and a red for a creature Orc Shaman. It's a 4/3, and the first spell you cast from exile each turn has Cascade. So again, it's just going to be super helpful. You cast that first spell from exile, and you get something free from the top of your deck. Now, what's super cool is with adventure spells, either the instant sorcery side or the permanent side can be caught by Cascade, I guess. So if you cast a 4 mana spell from exile and the first card you flip has an instant sorcery that's 6 mana, so that wouldn't trigger it, but the permanent side is 3 mana, then you get to play the permanent side for free, and vice versa. And the third card I want to talk about is now Feshni. I hope I'm saying that right. For a 5 and a red, it's a creature beast demon. It's a 4/6 with flying. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, copy it. You can choose new targets for the copy. If it's a permanent spell, the copy gains haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this permanent. So this is a card that, again, is pretty self-explanatory. Getting to copy all of our permanent spells that come in is going to be super helpful. Giving one of them haste so we can swing out, Or if, say, it's a Tilinkali Hunter and we get to just take advantage of the mana cost reduction for some of our other spells, this is just going to be super helpful. It's a big boy. 6 mana for this effect is nothing cheap, but I think the payoff is going to be enough to where it's worth its salt here. The next category that's going to be super important in this deck is returning creatures that we control to our hand. Because with the versatility of adventure spells, we want to be able to have access to those, and particular ones as you know, whenever we want. So, I mean, once we play the creature side, the only way we're going to have access to that, you know, the adventure side, is if we bring it back to our hand and cast it from our hand. So the first card in that vein is Call to Heal. It's 1 and a blue for an instant. You return target creature to its owner's hand. Its controller draws a card. So I think its controller drawing a card is meant to be a downside if you want to bounce someone else's creature. But for us, we want it back to our hand, so we just target one of our own creatures, and we get to draw a card as well. So this is just a pretty high value piece for this particular strategy. The next one is Crystal Shard. It's 3 mana for an artifact, and it has 3 and tap it, or pay a blue and tap it, and return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1. So again, there's a downside here. If you're trying to target other people's creatures, they can pay 1 and kind of nullify this effect. We're not paying the 1. We're just going to send it back to our hand for 1 mana, be able to cast it again. This is nice because it's a repeatable effect. You know, you can essentially do it once a turn. And so this is going to be super helpful for picking and choosing which card we want back into our hand. And then the third one is Aether Mutation. It's 3 green and a blue for a sorcery. You return target creature to its owner's hand and put X 1/1 green sapperling creature tokens into play, where X is its converted mana cost. So again, I mean, this is, you know, we get the right creature back to our hand, and as kind of an incidental benefit, we're going to get a board of nice 1/1s that we can play with, depending on, you know, the size of the creature that we're bouncing. All right, and that brings us to the veggies section of the deck tech. As always, when you're doing budget, you have to eat your veggies, and by that I mean having enough cards in your deck that fulfill mana ramp, card draw, and target removal, because that's going to be the way that you consistently perform and hopefully keep up with some of these higher powered, higher budget decks that are at your table. So quickly we'll go through some of the ramp spells here. The first is your commander, Beluna, the permanent side that has permanent spells you cast that have an adventure, cost 1 less to cast. In and of itself is going to have a huge effect. As you know, we have a ton of adventure spells in this deck, so we're going to be able to reduce a ton of mana over the course of a game if we have Beluna out. The next is Goblin Anarchomancer. It's a red and a green for a creature Goblin Shaman. It's a 2/2, and each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 less to cast. So again, super simple, super easy. Whether that's the permanent side or the adventure spell side, it's going to be helpful to reduce that mana. And the third is another goblin. It's Goblin Electromancer. It's blue and a red for a creature Goblin Wizard, 2/2, and instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So this is a little bit more narrow in that it only hits really the adventure side of our creatures. But in addition, it's going to help reduce the cost of any instant sorcery that we cast. So in a way, it's also hitting a lot more cards at the same time. Moving forward into the card draw section, we have Edgewall Innkeeper. It's a 1 green for a creature human peasant 1/1. Whenever you cast a creature spell that has an adventure, you draw a card. So again, we love the cards that will, you know, benefit us, bless us with cards for things that we're going to be doing anyway, and this fits right into it. We're going to be casting creatures that have adventure. So for 1 mana, I would love to be able to draw a card each time I do that. The next is Storyteller Pixie. It's 3 and a blue for a creature fairy wizard. It has flying, it's a 3/3, and whenever you cast an adventure spell, draw a card. So this is kind of the
flip side of Edgewall Innkeeper in that whenever we cast the adventure sorceries or instants, we also draw a card. Same deal, in that we're going to be doing this anyway. It's nice to get a benefit from it. And then Paradoxical Outcome is 3 and a blue for an instant. Return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents you control to their owner's hands. And you draw a card for each card returned to your hand this way. So this kind of fits into 2 of the categories we talked about here. Certainly the card draw, because we're drawing cards for any of the cards that come back to our hand. But it also fits into the returning to hand piece, right? So if, in response to a board wipe or something like that, we want to return all of our creatures. We return 6 creatures, draw 6 cards for 4 mana, and then we also have the flexibility of having all those adventure spells in our hand. This is going to be a high value type of piece. Now, if you only have 1 creature on the board, 4 mana to return it to your hand and draw 1 card is a little bit lackluster. So you'll have to pick and choose when to play this card for maximum value. But I think the upside is certainly worth it. And then finally we'll talk about the removal in this deck. The first one is Familiar's Ruse. It's 2 blue for an instant. As an additional cost to cast Familiar's Ruse, you return a creature you control to its owner's hand, and you counter target spell. So this is nice. There are not a whole lot of budget counter spells that are, universal like this, where you just get to counter anything. And the downside of returning a creature to our hand is kind of offset by the fact that a lot of our creatures we want back in our hand. So this is something that, depending on the moment you play it, is going to be super helpful. The one downside is you have to have a creature on the battlefield to be able to cast it at all. But as long as you do, this is going to be a super efficient, super budget counter spell. That'll be super helpful. The next 2 cards are removal tied to adventure spells. So the first is Embereth's Shieldbreaker. It's 1 and a red for a creature human knight, a 2/1. It also has Battle Display for a red. It's a sorcery adventure. Whenever you destroy target artifact when you cast it, essentially. So this is something that, again, if we want to play the returning cards to our hand game, we can cast it for its sorcery, have it go on an adventure, cast the permanent side, just have the 2/1 on the battlefield, and then whenever we want, return it to our hand whenever we need to destroy an artifact on the field. The next one is a Stormkeld Vanguard. It's 4 and 2 green for a creature, giant warrior. It's a 6/7 and can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. But it also has Bear Down, which is an adventure sorcery, destroy target artifact or enchantment. So kind of the same deal. It's a little bit more expensive on the permanent side, so we might not be able to bounce this back to our hand quite as often, because it'll be harder to play it out more consistently, but the versatility where artifact or enchantment, that's going to be helpful as well. And finally, we've gotten to the Thrift pick of the deck. For those of you who have watched the videos before, the Thrift pick is not necessarily the best card in the deck. Sometimes it is, but it's the card that I am most excited to play. If I end up building the deck and actually playing it with it in our play group, this is the card that I would be most excited to play out. And the Thrift pick for this deck is Fae of Wishes. So it's 1 and a blue for a creature, fairy wizard. It's a 1/4 with flying, and you can pay 1 and a blue to discard 2 cards and return Fae of Wishes to its owner's hand. That's a decent downside. I think we have better ways to return things to our hand. But the real kicker is the adventure side of this. So it's granted 3 and a blue for a sorcery. You can choose a non-creature card you own from outside the game, reveal it, and put it into your hand. This is ridiculous. There are zero, maybe not zero, very few commander legal cards that have this type of effect that are also on a budget, where you can just take whatever card you possibly need at any given moment. And now, it would need to be within the green, blue, red color identity for you to be able to cast it. But just the shenanigans that you can cause with this card it's super fun. And I could give some examples of cards that you might want to have on hand for this deck, but honestly, like, it's so versatile that whatever situation that you're in, there's you need a board wipe, you need some card draw, you need a target removal, anything like that. You need a way to give your creatures haste, like that sort of thing. Anything that's not already in the deck, this is going to be a way to grant that wish for you in that moment. And that brings us to the end of the deck here. I hope you guys enjoyed, got some inspiration here. As always, you can check out the full deck list in the description. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed.
Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video and were able to take some inspiration for your own thrifty decks. Comment down below if you think of any cards I missed or could have replaced. This is an educational channel, so additional insight and information is always welcome. In addition, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you all for sticking around, and until next time, stay thrifty.